everyone. Thank you so much for joining us back here on the Clan Chattan Association YouTube channel. I have with me today the very Reverend Allan Maclean of Dochgarroch. And I know that I never pronounced Dochgarroch correctly. I try, but I don't want to butcher it either. Allan, I'm so sorry, and welcome.
Over the years, the name Dochgarroch has changed its pronunciation, so I'm sure you'll be right at some point. It's an ancient Pictish name. The word Davoch was originally a bowl of oatmeal that could be produced from a certain amount of land, and it was spelt Davoch, but was pronounced Doch, and so on old documents it's D-A-U-G-H. But it's now been regularized to D-O-C-H, which is Doch. And then the second part is now called Garroch, and it's the same word as the part of Aberdeenshire that's called Garrioch. And if you come from Aberdeenshire, you call it Geary. And in the old documents of my family, the place name is not written Dochgarroch, it's written Dochgeary. So I sometimes wonder whether that's how I should pronounce it too, but I normally stick to Dochgarroch, and it's difficult enough with that. But it's quite a well-known place now because it's the principal lock on the Caledonian Canal, which links the sea to Loch Ness. And recently it's become the rather an important place for people keeping their yachts and keeping bigger boats that take people down Loch Ness. And because it's the last loch. But my family, of course, though they lived there from somewhere about 1560 to 1830, were around much longer in the north of Scotland, and that's why they're called the Macleans of the North. All Macleans of the North are Macleans, but not all Macleans have the privilege of being Macleans of the North. So there's a slight distinction there. And the reason that we are based a little distance from the Isle of Mull is that the Macleans were the retainers of the Lords of the Isles. In fact, they were rather late on the scene in appearing in about 1350, the two brothers, Lachlan and Hector. And Hector's eldest son was in the vanguard of the Lords of the Isles when they were pushing north in order to make a much bigger area for the lordship and trying to take over the earldom of Ross. And so the Lords of the Isles made, he was called Charles Maclean, they made him the constable of Urquhart Castle. And my family, before they were called Macleans of Dochgarroch, were called Macleans of Urquhart. So they were based in and around Urquhart Castle for some 150 years. But of course, the Lords of the Isles were not always very successful in keeping their lands. And when they were losing out, then the poor Macleans were no longer the constables of the castle, and they were living nearby in their own house, which in fact is at a place called Loch End. It's at the very north of Loch Ness. And it was later a great story about the spirits and the ghosts there, because it was used so much by in fighting. And it's now called, or the site is called Castle Spiridon, which means the castle of the spirits and ghosts. It was pulled down when the Caledonian Canal was put through. But one rather extraordinary thing is, Cindy, that it was known about from tradition as being the Maclean Castle, but there was no positive evidence of it in contemporary documents. And recently, it's quite a long story, which I won't go into in great detail, but a document of Roderick Maclean, who was a bishop, was discovered in, he was a poet, and he was the first poet to write about St. Columba. A book about his poems has recently been published, and there was only one copy that was known in Aberdeen University Library. It was printed in the 1540s, about then, And then the editor discovered there were two other copies which were in rather unknown libraries in Italy. And in one of them, attached to the back of the book of poems, published book of poems, there was a letter too, also by Roderick Maclean, in which he was asserting what an important person he was and why he needed promotion. It was a letter to the Pope, and in it he mentions that he was brought up at the head of Loch Ness in a castle where the green fields are and where the water flows out swiftly from Loch Ness. So it's just rather amazing that for years, centuries have been traditions of the Macleans being there and the ghosts, but it's only in the last 2 years that it's ever come to light that there was actually contemporary evidence of it. So we were rather pleased about that.
I've never heard about this castle at all. And I'm very familiar with that area in and around Drumnadrochit. I like saying that word, I had to throw that in there with the little town. I would like to go see. Have you been to where this would have been? The property, the grounds, have
Oh,
you?
well, yes, certainly there are pictures of the castle, and it was demolished when the Caledonian Canal was put through. As you may know, the Caledonian Canal connects the North Sea with the Atlantic, and it takes the boats through the length of Loch Ness and Loch Oich and Loch Lochy, and then out into the sea at Fort William. And it was built in about 1820 in order that the fishing boats and others could go through. But by the time it was built, in fact, it was slightly redundant because bigger boats had been built and could sail around the north of Scotland. But it's a wonderful link designed by Thomas Telford, who also designed the Kiel Canal, which connects through Schleswig-Holstein at the north of Germany, connects the Baltic with the North Sea as well. He was a great engineer, and I have a great respect for him. He was built roads and canals and bridges, but rather strangely, I, in fact, many years ago wrote a book about him or about his work because he also designed 30 churches in the Highlands of Scotland and 40 manses. That's where the minister lived. They were some churches he did up, but the 30 that he designed all have a common pattern, slight differences, and they were built in remote places all over the Highlands. And when I was a student studying Scottish history and Scottish architecture, there was a theory in those days that there was no architecture in the Highlands. Completely untrue, of course, and no one had ever written about these churches. And so I wrote, it's a booklet, really, more than a book, but that set me on the track of, I suppose, church history and, in a way, Highland history as well. But there were not many Macleans about in it, but there was one Maclean on the island of Mull, Maclean of Lochbuie, and he had one of these churches, but somehow he managed to adapt it so that his design is rather different from the other 29. I suppose the most famous one is the one on Iona, the parish church, which everyone passes as they go from the pier to the abbey. And they also pass their Maclean's cross, which is one of the earliest of medieval crosses on Mull. There's always an argument whether it's the earliest or the most recent, but whichever way, I think it was made in about the 14th century. And rather nice to have a cross named from one's own family there. Also, of course, on Iona, there's a very famous tombstone to someone called Prioress Anna Maclean. She was the one from last prioress in the Catholic times before the Reformation, and she has a most wonderful tombstone which shows her in her robes, and she had two pet dogs, and they're also shown on the tombstone. it's of interest to me in particular because she was a Maclean of the North. Her first cousin, actually, was the first Maclean of Dochgarroch, who settled there. And so her father was the sheriff of Inverness. He was called Donald Maclean. And the tombstone is a rather wonderful memorial. There's none other like it. And when she retired or died, I think, she was succeeded by Mary Maclean, and she was the sister of Maclean of Dochgarroch of the time. We have kept our links with the with Mull, even though separated from it. We're a separate part of the Clan Maclean, centred round Inverness and joined the Clan Chattan in quite early times, 1390. But we also kept our links with the with Mull, and I suppose that's one of the things that's a difficulty for my family, because my father, who was a great genealogist, always said you shouldn't belong to more than one clan society. And my family had been founders of the Clan Maclean Association, of which I've been president in my turn, and so has Anne, my wife. But I've always had a great affection for the Clan Chattan, and I did overrule my father and said, well, actually, I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't belong to two clan associations. And actually, I think I also belong to the Clan Cameron one, because my mother was a very keen Cameron, and my wife is half Cameron, and my son, eldest son Hector, is Hector Allan Cameron Maclean. So we do keep the link with the Camerons, but priority is with Maclean and with Clan Chattan.
I'm so happy to hear that. And if you hadn't have been so involved with the Clan Chattan, I don't know if we would have met or become friends. I've just lovely friends, you and your wife, Anne, over the years, and Augusta and your family. Just it's been wonderful. So I'm very happy you decided to.
The Clan Chattan it's a very difficult concept, isn't it? Because it makes sense up to a point in Scotland, the Confederacy. But these days, most clans think of themselves by their surname, be it Macpherson or MacBain or Maclean or Mackintosh. And to say that in the past they belonged to this most wonderful Confederacy is makes it more difficult, I think, when they're not people living in Scotland, or at least even in the Inverness area. And I can quite see why people, and particularly Macleans, join the Clan Maclean Association, even though their families come from the north. The thing is that all Macleans of the north are Macleans, but not all Macleans are Macleans of the north. And so the number of Macleans who are members of the Clan Chattan Association are in fact not very many numerically. I keep the database for the Clan Maclean Association, and we have 4,500 names, people, Scotland based. And of course, lots of them we've lost touch with, I might add, but the database is now about 4,500. And these days, though, one has to deal mostly through email, and our number of emails is only about 600. But I always wish that the Clan Chattan Association would also make a priority of getting people's email addresses, because these days it makes things so much easier in keeping in touch with people around the world, just by the press of a button on that.
I have begun this project, Alan. You'd be happy to know. So I have a plan. I've begun this project so that we can keep in touch with everyone. And it's funny you should talk about the Confederation. Yes, you're absolutely right. Most people do not understand what Clan Chattan is, or about the Confederation. I find myself having to explain that a great deal. Our vertical banner listing out all of the 12 major, clans, is very helpful to have out, and then people ask about it. But as far as I can tell, it really truly is the only confederation that ever was in Scotland. I've had several people confirm that so far. So maybe that is the
My understanding of it, and I've looked into it a bit, is that there is both the historical Clan Chattan, which we're part, and there's the traditional Clan Chattan, which no doubt has a basis in truth. And it was a big confederacy, the traditional one. And when it split in two, and our families all moved eastwards into Strathspey and around Inverness, there were many that were left behind, and they formed the Clan Cameron, which perhaps is the origin of the difficulties and differences between Clan Chattan, the clan of the cats, and Clan Cameron, which is the clan of the dogs. And I think that lies behind the terrific rivalry over the ownership of certain lands in Loch Aber. But the difference is that the Clan Chattan families mostly kept their own individual names. I think some people, there is one family called Cattanach, isn't it, that the Macphersons in particular claim. But they, in general, we all kept our own clan names, whereas the Camerons, of which there were quite a few in the remaining confederacy, including the, in particular, the McGillanes, Strone, but there were also the McMartins of Letterfinlay, and there were the Macmillans, and there were also the McSorleys in Glen Nevis. They all, over the years, took the name Cameron. So their confederacy doesn't appear as a confederacy any longer, but appears as a total clan, as it were.
But it was, and I know I just had this discussion with Philip Beddoes, who came on to have more of a chat about the histories, and we actually wondered, because Ava, who in 1291 married Angus, her uncles also could have maybe had a claim to Tor Castle when she and her husband left and they retreated to Rothy Marcus. That's when the Camerons came in and really moved into Tor Castle and really claimed the lands around Loch Arbor. And it could have been that they really felt that they had a claim because those were her uncles that initially and originally,
Yes.
that as I understand it.
It is rather strange what happened there, isn't it? In later times, we think much more of chiefships going from father to son, and rarely through females. But in the earlier days, it quite often went to brothers and nephews. And that means that it's particularly difficult when you're looking back at history of the clans, where there isn't a great deal of original material surviving as to how quite it worked. And that certainly applied in the Macleans of the North. Charles Maclean, after the first constable at the first Maclean constable at Urquhart Castle, had a son who was called Hector Bowie. In fact, he was the one of the murderous ones at Castle Spiriton, who murdered the Camerons when they. It's all a horrible story, but we do know about him, and he was also called Seneschal of Urquhart and entertained the Lords of the Isles there. And it was always assumed by, for instance, Maclean of Dochgarroch cousin, Charles Fraser Mackintosh, the great antiquarian, that the chiefship had passed from father to son. But a most remarkable thing, there's the book, you're showing it, in a most remarkable thing, when I studied Scottish history, there was two historians called Kenneth Steer and John Bannerman. And they were very keen, interested, particularly John Bannerman, in the Lordship of the Isles. Kenneth Steer was more of an academic to do with stones. they realized that these medieval stones that are under the grass or propped up on Iona, if you looked very carefully, they had inscriptions round them, some of which had been transcribed in the past, but many were not. But by modern camera uses of camera and color, they were able to translate some of these inscriptions which had been lost for centuries. And there's a huge stone at Loch that's in Morven, above the Sound of Mull. It's a rather wonderful stone with a big cross on it. It also has a lovely galley, and it has little figures in the galley. You can see them as they're running the boat. And then they looked at they discovered that indeed there was an inscription there. And it was an inscription to Charles Maclean, the Constable of Urquhart Castle, and his son Hector, but also his son Lachlan. And it's quite clear from the wording of it that Charlotte was succeeded by Hector, who was succeeded by his brother Lachlan. And then it reverted to Hector's children. And we know about Lachlan because he was the leader of the MacDonald forces against the Mackenzies at the Battle of Park, which is in about 1490. So we knew he existed, but we never knew that he was actually the chief of the Macleans of the North. So it's the most extraordinary thing that, rather like Roderick and the castle at the head of Loch Ness, you think there can be nothing new to discover in history, and yet here this tombstone records it all. And also, of course, the little figures of the Macleans are probably the earliest drawings of Macleans as well, sitting in their galley. And that's a red herring in the sense, except to say that long ago, chiefships did pass in different ways. And so maybe Eva isn't quite as unusual as we might think she is.
Yeah, maybe not. And I know that there's some controversy surrounding, from time to time, surrounding her existence entirely, but she is recorded in different places. And also, I think that the Macphersons would have had something to say had she not existed. They would have challenged, and they did not. So I think there's a good argument for her existence, and it does make a lot of sense to me, or I think to anyone reading the account, that, you know, after the retreat from Lochcarver to Rothimarcus, that the uncles would have moved in to Tor Castle, and it wasn't just that the Camerons were there, that they were, you know, and it was vacant. They felt they had the right, and they were connected and they were kin, and so all of that makes a bit more sense to me. I don't know anyone else, just my own opinion. It makes more sense that they, and then the ongoing feud for the 360 years that followed was just.
I'm sure we could look at it even more carefully in the light of modern research. And I know people who hold views on both sides. But David Seller, who was the Lord Lion, King of Arms, the last one actually, before Joe Morrow, and both of whom are friends of mine. But David Seller was a great Highland historian and interested in genealogy and all these intricacies. And he was the one who witnessed the re-signing of the Clan bond that I arranged in Inverness. He was there in all his splendor. But I remember saying to him one time about being slightly dubious about Eva and thinking that he would be too. And he said, oh no, I think there's lots of evidence that Eva existed. 1609 bond of union, I do think, is crucial to the confederacy of the Clan Chattan and its survival. I think that it was it was fading away a bit before 1609, and without going into great details, it's the same here as the Statutes of Iona, in which King James was trying to bring order to the Highlands, and he made the chiefs responsible for their clans. And so it became terribly important to know who was in a clan. And I think that that lies a great deal behind the 1609 Bond of Union, as well as the fact that the chief of the Macintoshes was young, and so his uncle was having to pull things together, and I think was rather frightened that they might lose out if they didn't actually produce a clan for themselves. I think it's also very interesting because it does include pretty well every clan in the Confederacy in different ways. And prior to 2009, I spent quite a time identifying all the people who had signed the Band of Union. I was very pleased to find the original copy of the Band of Union, which was in the Register House in Edinburgh and hadn't really been recognized there. And so I thought it would be very good to produce a new Band of Union for the 400th anniversary. I knew that the Macintoshes were, of course, always had their own views about the Clan Chattan, but it was quite clear that the Macphersons of Cluny and their relations signed that one in 1609. So I thought, well, what should we do about having a new Band of Union? And so I knew that the friend of mine, the present, or the then chief of the Macphersons, Cluny Macpherson, was a very well-known lawyer, in fact, extremely well-known. And so I asked him to draw up the wording for the new Band of Union, because I felt if he had written it, then no one was going to object to it. So I was very pleased that he drew up a wording that's rather suitable for the contemporary age about being friends with each other and supporting each other wherever we are. And then, as I'm sure you know, we had a re-signing of the Band of Union in Inverness, and it was the early days of internet, and Stuart Cross, who is John Mackintosh of Mackintosh's brother-in-law, he used the department at the university in Dundee to help him produce a way whereby people could sign it round the world. And I think, did we not get 3,500 signatures?
Yes, we
It was
did.
great.
It was amazing.
And then I did get pretty well all the chiefs. I think I got all the chiefs to come. And we unveiled a monument, or yes, a monument at a place called Termit, which was where the original band was signed. It's near Inverness Airport. And then we marched through town and we came to Eden Court. And then I'd also asked John McFarlane. His mother was a McIntyre, and the McIntyres have a connection also with Clan Chattan. He's a great Gaelic scholar. And I asked him to recite each chief's names in the traditional way, going back to the people who had signed in 1609, and he wrote it in Gaelic and then in English. I thought it was a very impressive ceremony, which I think I will never forget.
Yes, I think all of us that were present will absolutely never forget. And very well done, you. You did such an amazing job, and you are so good and diplomatic at being able to bring people together and to keep these connections with these chiefs, and to bring everyone together to a place and to have that drawn up. It really truly was very special that we could witness something like that in our lifetime. And so I just want to thank you again for putting that together. It was spectacular, to say the least. Thank you for it.
I rather hoped that it might be covered by the media around the world in a way more than it was, but it certainly hit the headlines in Inverness, and also I think in Scotland, and there were photos of it. And I felt slightly junior because there are the 12 tribes in Clan Chattan, and I think 10 of them have chiefs of the name. But of course, my Macleans are the Macleans of the north, and the chief of all the Macleans lives on Mull. To be, as I'm sure you know, a chief, you wear 3 feathers um, in your bonnet. I don't aspire to wear 3 because my Macleans are a part of the bigger Clan Maclean. But recently, this was made for me, which I think might amuse people.
Oh, I love it.
It has the Maclean crest in the middle of the circle, and then it has 2 feathers. And it was made in Canada and sent over. And it was a gift from the congregation that I looked after in Edinburgh through the pandemic as a thank you for my work there. And I look forward to using it in the future. But
That's
I'm still keeping my 2 feathers rather than my 3 feathers. The
oh,
other thing that is, of course, slightly different, I don't know if you can see it, is that in the circle, it's not a wildcat like all the other clans of the Clan Chattan have, but it has the Maclean battle axe with
that's
the cypress on one side and the other part of the wreath on the other side. The motto of the Macleans is Vincere vel mori, to conquer or to die. And so the wreath is, if you a wreath for death is cypress, and a wreath for life, which I can't remember for the moment, is the other side of it. So I'm quite pleased about that, but I do sometimes wish that I had a wildcat as well, because I know that my Macleans did use the wildcat as their crest. But when the coats of arms were all registered, very late for the Macleans in about 1900, it was decided that everyone should go for the Maclean crest rather than the cat.
oh. Well, can you have your own
The
made?
Macleans of I could also mention that the Macleans of the North, or the Macleans of Dochgarroch, are buried in a mausoleum right in the centre of Inverness, and in fact underneath, next to the telephone exchange. It was the friars, Black Friars, before the Reformation, even though it's now called the Grey Friars. And at the Reformation, the chiefs of the Macintoshes were buried there prior to their being buried at Petty, which is on the, as you may know, on the road out to Nairn. So my family are buried there, and on the tombstone of John Maclean, he's called the Honest Gentleman, and it says on his tombstone, and he died in 1674, and of course, heraldically, you have to prove that your family had coats of arms before 1672, which was when the heralds off in the court of the Lord Lion's register was burnt, and they started again. And so the coat of arms that's on that tombstone is the one that I use, and it's rather different and duly registered. It's rather different from the other coats of arms and heraldry of the other chiefs in the Clan Chattan, which are divided into 4, mostly, apart from Macpherson, and the items in it are all totemic. They all mean something in history. And but my one has 3 items on it, which is very unusual. In fact, I think is unique. At one point, the Macleans of the North were given by their one of their sons, who was a bishop of the Isles, the island of Rasa, which is off Skye. Now, the island belonged to the bishops of the Isles, but it was occupied by the MacLeods. And So Bishop Farquhar Maclean gave it to his brother Donald. It's what my father called a sheepskin title. It was of no interest, but Alexander Maclean in the 1650s, I think, did take seisin, even though it had been granted to the family 100 years before. And so we know that they did that. The reason for mentioning that is that in Pont's Armorial, which is an early history of depiction of coats of arms of Scottish families, there's a Maclean one there. Well, there's a castle, which is normally a MacLeod coat of arms, but not the MacLeods of Rasa. And it says underneath Maclean of Rasa. And that, I'm sure, is the basis of the coat of arms in the mausoleum from 1670, 100 years later, in Inverness.
So the mausoleum is still there. I didn't know about this.
Yes, mausoleum is perhaps rather a grand word for the stones that lie. It's a very strange little graveyard, and at one point they wanted to lift the stones and build the extension to the telephone exchange there, and my father interceded, and they made a big bridge across and built on the other side of the graveyard. So it's got a sort of, it's rather like a tunnel, really, but at least it's still there, and has a lot of Macintoshes, particularly the Macintoshes of Borlum that's are there, and it also has Chisholms, but in the centre is the Dochgarroch part.
Well, we must go and see it this year. When I'm there, I'm going to go.
After the Macleans in 1509 were pushed out of Urquhart Castle by the Grants, who, interestingly enough, the family later intermarried several times, and our own house in Glen Urquhart is a dower house of the Grant family, and dating back probably to the 1730s there. But poor Farquhar Maclean got pushed out, and so he was looking for somewhere to extend his lands, having lost Glen Urquhart, and he went over the hill towards Bewley to a place called Glen Confinth. And my father discovered that there was a record that his mother was a Macintosh, and his first cousin was someone called Farquhar Maclean's first cousin was someone called Dúil Mór, that's a big ducal, Dúil Mór Macintosh. And in the book Macintoshes and Clan Chattan, it's clear that A.M. Mackintosh was not very keen on Dúil Mór, but we weren't either. And so Farquhar took out a lawsuit against Dúil Mór for stealing his unicorn, which he'd stolen from Glen Confinth. And the law case went, first of all, no doubt, to Inverness, but it went then to the High Court in Inverness, in Edinburgh. And Farquhar Maclean won his case against his cousin, and Dúil Mór was ordered to return to Farquhar Maclean his unicorn. Rather strange, isn't it? Shopping in Bewley, and we climb the hill from Drumnadrochid and go down through Glen Confinth. I like to think of the little unicorn prancing around in the glen, and that Farquhar got it back again.
I was wondering, was it a statue? Was it? That's quite the fun story. Oh my goodness. I know you have others we probably shouldn't, we probably can't really talk about. I know you had an item.
Ian Maclean in Nova Scotia, who is his family come, in fact, from Drumnadrochid. Originally, they emigrated to Pictou in Nova Scotia in about 1840, I think. And he's a very keen Maclean, and he's a member of the Clan Chattan Association, and he produced for us these badges. Now, I don't know if you can see them, but they have the cat, and I always wear that when it's a Clan Chattan occasion. And I also very fond of this little badge, the little one that we all wear.
Yes,
and,
yes.
It's got the whortleberry on it, and I think it's very discreet sign of being a member of Clan Chattan.
talking about the unicorn and having that be kind of an interesting story, I know that you had an item that was supposed to go to, was it the President of the United States?
Oh, well, I do have that, yes.
I don't know if that's
But that's not a Maclean. That's from the Murrays. Yes.
I don't know if that was, we're supposed to talk about that, but I find that fascinating and a fun story. And they
Maybe that's a story for another occasion.
we can
I
wait.
can't remember. Have you been to our house in Edinburgh?
Not in Edinburgh, but in yeah.
No, that's what it's a clock that Napoleon was giving to Jefferson, wasn't it? But
That's
my forebear intercepted it, and due to a dream in the night where he was told to change his course, and they intercepted the boat going from France. And it was designed for the White House, but of course, had it got there, it would have been burnt by the British in 1812.
that's quite fun too as
The only
well.
other thing, perhaps, you maybe of interest about the Macleans of Dochgarroch and the Macleans of the North, but the Macleans of Dochgarroch, during the lockdown, we were all doing family research. I mean, I'm fortunate in two ways. First of all, my family documents go back to 1560, and I have this large collection of Maclean documents going back for our family. And also, my father was a keen genealogist, and my grandfather, and two generations further back, one of them rather fanciful in what he wrote and published. But we always knew that a second cousin of the Macleans of Dochgarroch was a print seller, rather famous print seller in London. And you can quite often buy prints with has at the bottom Thomas Maclean Haymarket print seller. And so during the lockdown, I thought I would research this family, which I'd never really gone into great detail about. I mean, I knew they existed. And with the modern things, you can find out so much more with censuses and births and deaths all online. And I found that one called Roderick Maclean, his had brothers and sisters, and they all died about 1900, 1910, and mostly around London, but one or two in Australia. But there was one who died in the county of Surrey in the 1920s, and he was called Roderick Maclean. And I thought, well, that's rather extraordinary. I wonder where he died there. And I looked it up, and he died in the mental hospital called Broadmoor, which
Oh,
is for the criminally insane. So
oh,
then I thought, well, I wonder what he was doing there. And you know that he was the eighth and last person who tried to assassinate Queen Victoria.
oh my good heavens.
But I'm not sure if that's something to publish or not. But
Well, it is
it's an
history after all.
added attraction for the Clan Chattan, isn't it?
That's that's quite fun.
There's a great move in the Lion Court and in the Scottish government, but no doubt dating right back to Walter Scott's visit to arrangement for George IV's visit in 1820s, that all Scottish people should have tartans and they should all have chiefs. And so there are many families in the lowlands around Glasgow and Edinburgh and in the borders who now call themselves clans when they're really families. And they all have tartans, which is very nice for them. But there is something that's very specific about Highland clans, and that our way of doing things are different. And so it was, I suppose, about maybe 8 years ago that Graham Mackenzie, who is the Shanachi for Clan Macmillan and Clan Mackenzie, and is also much involved in ancestral tourism to the Highlands, and is a historian, that we decided to found something called the Association of Highland Clans and Societies. It's really intended for the office bearers as much as for the members. to raise the profile of the Highland clans. And before the lockdown, we collected together somewhere about 36 clans that have joined it. Having said that, 12 of them, Clan Chattan is one, but we count it as 12 because it has all the clans within it. And we rather had to shut down in the pandemic, but we're up and running again. And initially, Graham was the chairman, and my wife, Anne, was the secretary who got it going. And then Graham stepped down, and I, when it was sort of revived last year, we have a tent at the Inverness Games, which includes about 12 different clans, maybe 14. And with others, I think there are 20 tables in this tent. And afterwards, we, as it were, founded the Association of Highland Clans and Societies, and I'm the chairman now.
That's excellent. I am so glad to hear that you're picking up this work. I hope to be able to come and take part in that and learn more about it. And I think it's interesting for people to know. I think that the general consensus in the US is that any family name from Scotland must be a clan, or they think they're all Highland or Highland clans or Highlanders. And so there's this misconception of what truly the Highland clans were, and as opposed to the lowland families and the lowland family names. Certainly we can link anything here in the description and let people know about the work that you're doing.
Well, that would be very good if that could happen. I think there was also a feeling that the Scottish government were taking the Highland clans for granted, and they were arranging things without discussing it with the specific ideas of the Highland clans. And I think that we have succeeded in that. It's sort of equivalent to, is it called COSCA in the United States, which I think is it called the Corporation of Scottish Clans and Associations? But that's Scotland rather than Highland.
Yes.
And then unfortunately in the pandemic, we lost our website for some reason. And so a new organization based in the States, but a commercial organization, has now assumed itself the name of Association of Highland Clans and Societies. But that is different from ours.
Well, isn't that often the case? Can we call it the Americans hijacking of Scotland or the Scottish Highlands? You and I have had this conversation before. It's true, though.
We did miss signing with the website, and then they put it out to offer. And then this other group snapped it up, I think is what happened.
We're going to promote the proper one here on this channel. So we will do that, and hopefully we can all get involved with that movement and watch the good work that you and Graham are doing. Hopefully we can connect with Graham. We often talk about Graham on this channel. Hopefully he'll come on. Have a chat with us. Allan Maclean, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come on here and talk to the viewers and talk to other people from the Clan Chattan Association, hopefully Macleans and some Macleans from the north as well. And I very much look forward to having you back on again, talking more about your activities with the Highland clans, and also seeing you at the AGM in August and meeting your new grandchild.
I've not yet signed him up, I'm afraid, but I will before they put the prices up.
We shall do it.
Expensive, belonging to several clans.
It does. We should do the lifetime membership so we never have to worry about it again. So, Allan Maclean of Dochgarroch, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for taking the time. We greatly appreciate you. We will
Well, goodbye to everyone.
say goodbye for now. We'll see you again soon.